Okay, well, I'm coming from the Pacific time zone, so I won't force you to be all awake and say hello to me. Uh, my name is Sara Kobilka, and I too actually spent most of my life in the informal science education realm, working at science museums, running camps, really focusing on that engage and inspire and the aha moments and all that exciting stuff until I transitioned recently into a more formal education role. And I actually just finished a Master's of Science in Science Education from the University of Montana in Bozeman. And it was an opportunity for me to learn a little bit more about the best practices of the formal education realm. And I think we can take some of those best practices and maybe they have a role for us to play. I know we like to think we informal people got all the best stuff, but I would like to propose an idea called backwards design. And just by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of that concept? Excellent. Okay, so we've heard of it. For those who haven't heard of it, Inspired by Design by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe is a wonderful book on that topic. It's a planning framework. And on the Vanderbilt website, if you just do a Google search of backwards design, you're going to find a video of Grant Wiggins doing some teacher training. And one of the questions he says, or one of the statements he says is, it's your job to know where we want to end up. And we just said at the beginning, how will I know that this is successful? And knowing what the goal is critical for designing your program. You have to think from that backwards position because there's a disconnect from our short-term actions and our long-term goals if we don't take that backwards position. So one thing that teachers often get challenged on is that they teach to the test, that they are focused on the content part, and especially before the next generation science standards came in and gave us the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts, those content strands really were everything. And so the concept that was come up with the backwards design is that you have 3 steps. You start with your end desire, your goals, then you figure out how do you assess to see if you've met those goals, and not just what you're going to take a test or a quiz on in a formal classroom, but what skills do you want people to have, what connections do you want them to be able to make, and then finally, they plan the learning experience and instruction. And in our case, in outreach, we might come up with this really great idea of the activity that we're gonna do, and then we have to assess it, and then maybe then we'll kind of think about what the goal was and why we even did it. And that disconnect just doesn't work. So the questions that you want to be thinking about with your goals, and questions I don't have answers to, but what do you want your students to be able to do with what they learn? What meanings or transfers do you want to make? And when we go from that meaning angle, it puts power in the students because it implies that they already know something and they can take what you're teaching them and experiences that you're giving them and take them and apply them to something that already matters to them. And when we talk about those goals that we want to set, we use the acronym SMART. So S is specific, M is measurable, there's those metrics again, A, achievable, you're not going to eradicate hunger, but you can make an achievable goal with regards to that. You have R, relevant to the program that you're doing, and T, time-bound. You can't have a goal that's just going to continue going on forever. You've got a funder, you've got a time period, or even just a program, you still want to have times with that. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant to the program, and time-bound. Now, going back to when you set those goals, I ask you the question of who's at the table when you start that planning process. Oftentimes, we do some work at the STEM Learning Center with NSF-funded programs, and many of you in this room have had people come in and say, okay, my application is due in 1 week. Can you write a letter of support and help me out with my broader impacts part, because I really didn't think about it, but I got my whole research ready to go. So when can we get into that conversation? Can we get in sooner? Who else needs to be part of that conversation? When do you bring the audience that you're trying to serve into the conversation? Especially if you're talking about some students who are older, if you're looking at working with youth, high school kids have a lot to say, and they know what they want, they know what they're passionate about, they know what will mean something to them. So can you bring them to the table at an earlier point? We talk about, we had the concept of IRB just brought up. Well, do you bring education researchers? Do you work with your department, with the College of Education at your university, or people who are education researchers? Because there is a difference between evaluating a program and doing education research on a program. And so these people can bring in some expertise and maybe answer some of those questions that we might have, because that's not our area of expertise. When do you bring in those informal science educators, the people from the museum, from the zoo, from the Boys and Girls Club? Not, oh, we've got this whole idea, now we want to bring it to your setting, but hey, come talk to us about how we design something for your setting. So we don't make all these ideas, or come up with all the ideas, and then we try to fit them into your setting. So things to think about as you're doing it. When you have those groups together and talking from the very beginning, another bonus that comes out of it is you get that shared vocabulary. And having that shared vocabulary then allows you to have that communication on the topic going forward and moving forward and making it more of a sustainable, not a one-off thing, but truly building that relationship and connecting you with those people and those audiences. Karen asked the question, what data is worth sharing? I would ask this question, what data is worth collecting? Sometimes we put a lot of time and effort into collecting all this stuff because, well, I think it might be useful. But really, we have limited resources, and we have to acknowledge that. So what is worth it for us and for telling that story that was mentioned? We need the who, the what, the where, the what, and the when. Those are your sometimes more metrics, numerical things, your quantitative data. But you need that qualitative data as well to tell you the how and the why. I can tell you that we increased from 30 to 60%, but how did it happen? Why did it happen? That's where that qualitative data comes in my personal feelings. And so connecting partners, audiences, education researchers, learning experiences to your assessment, which is tied to your goals, all this concept of connectedness, if you like talking about it, well, you are in luck, because the National Alliance for Broader Impacts is coming to sunny Tucson, Arizona, and that is going to be happening April 30th through May 2nd, and connectedness is our theme, so we have good conversations going on here, and then you go through, for most of you, a cold, horrible winter, and then you need to get away from it all and work on your tan. So I am personally inviting each and every one of you in this room to join us for NABI in Tucson, Arizona, and we'll be passing out these postcards so that you can remember to join us for the fun to talk about connections. So that's it.